Today is November 12th. Yesterday was November 11th. In Canada, we call it Remembrance Day. In the United States, it's Veterans Day, something like that. Anyway, so in Canada, we have a television celebrity named Don Cherry, who would be for years on the CBC and recently on another television channel for a show called Hockey Night in Canada. Now, while the hockey game was on, there would be an announcer of whichever announcer announced in that city, I suppose. And then between breaks, when people go and get some coffee, some beer, or whatever they're going to do, get a snack, between the periods, there would be this goof that came on called Don Cherry. His commentary about the players themselves and the game itself was often reasonable. You know, he's a coach. He probably knows the game certainly a lot better than I do, that's for sure. But he would also get into things like, oh, those European players, they're not tough enough, they're wimps, they don't fight, and all that kind of crap. So he started demonstrating his xenophobia, or his bigoted kind of attitudes, many years ago. And at first it was perhaps not so extreme, so it was actually kind of comical. And I always felt he was simply a comedian, sort of a way to have comedic break between the hockey periods, which was like 20 minutes or so. And so anyway, this guy's been fired the other day. He was fired after saying that cities that had large populations of immigrants were not buying poppies, and Canadians have historically bought poppies for Remembrance Day. So what he was saying is that you're not Canadian, you're not being responsible, and if you did not buy a poppy and wear it proudly. So what he was suggesting is that all Canadians should be goose-stepping to Don Cherry's ideas. He has forgotten that all of the people that we are remembering, those people who were involved in the wars, were fighting against the need to goose-step to some boss or some leader. There's a big controversy going on in Canada, and I find it absolutely annoying or abhorrent. We've had a television celebrity who has basically been the comedic act between periods of hockey on a show called Hockey Night in Canada. And for you Americans, you must know that hockey is a big sport in Canada. Certainly it's a pretty big sport in the United States, as most NHL teams are in the United States. I don't think that you see Don Cherry in the United States, but you might if you're following a Canadian channel. Anyway, he's been a figurehead on that show or maybe the star of the show, for 30, 40-ish years, something like that, more or less. I was a very young man watching him, and at the time I thought he was an asshole, way back when I was a young guy. But you know, he's not changed. He hasn't grown as times changed. He keeps trying to hold on to the past. In any case, he was fired the other day because sponsors of that television show, Hockey Night in Canada, would be losing money or stopped or decided not to support him. But certainly the TV station or the TV network would have to drop the guy, because the sponsors would have made sure that would happen, or they would just drop their sponsorship of the show. In any case, a lot of Canadians are arguing and getting all upset about this. And basically what he said is that smaller towns where there's fewer immigrants, everybody wears a poppy, which is like utter bullshit. Then he claimed that the larger cities like Toronto in his particular example, people don't wear poppies and they're not walking around on the street with poppies. And that's because they're mostly immigrants. So what he's done is kind of grouped together the whole city of Toronto, whether they're immigrants or not, and complained that they're not buying poppies, as if buying a poppy was the only way that you can honor those people who were involved in the Second World War. Now, Canada's not different from the United States. It was natives who lived here, and then the British and the French came over here, made friends with the natives, and did what they can to trade with the natives, until eventually a large population came to this country and essentially destroyed the lifestyle that the natives had at the time when they came over. So every single person in Canada is a descendant of an immigrant, unless they are a native, and even they were immigrants to this country or to this land at some point in the past. No humans were here at one time, so everybody is an immigrant. Although I'm going to give the natives the benefit of all doubt. They actually were here before white people, British and French, came here and took over the land that they used to have. So Canada is a country that has been dependent on immigrants forever. Our economy is completely dependent on immigrants. If we don't have them coming into the country, our economy does not grow. It's that simple. And yet there is a group of people in the country who love to hate immigrants and blame them for all of, in other words, I mean, if there weren't immigrants, they would be blaming their next door neighbor. They're people who victimized people. They feel victimized by immigrants that come into the country. So there's a large population that feel that he's wrongfully been dismissed. Well, here's the facts, guys. What Don Cherry said is that immigrants don't honor our Remembrance Day in the manner that Don Cherry thinks they should. All of the people that we're remembering, those veterans that fought in all of the wars, every single person who was fighting in any war that Canada and mostly the United States and other countries in the world, anybody who was fighting in those wars were actually fighting for people's rights. Their rights to worship and their rights to traditions and their rights to express themselves in any manner they wish, which would, in theory, enable Don Cherry to have the right to express himself. Hitler had the right to express himself with hate. He had the right to hope or demand that everybody goose-step to his wishes. But he eventually came into power and everybody in fact had to goose-step to his wishes. And that's the jerk-ass, that's the asshole, that's the guy that the veterans were fighting against. That's the thing the veterans were fighting against. They were fighting against those who speak out or act in manners that would curtail the rights of others. So unhappily, and I'm very ashamed of them, we have Canadians who believe that you got to be white and you have to be buying a freaking red poppy in order to properly honor those people who fought in our wars. They forget that a lot of those immigrants come from countries like India, where the Burqas were fighting on behalf of the British Army all through Malaysia and all in through that area. So we had Indians, like people from India, fighting in the Second World War. There were Japanese, there were Chinese, there were Filipinos. There were just about every race and every, what do you call it? Every ethnic kind of group fighting in the Second World War. It's called a world war because the world was at war. Everybody in the world was at war. And Remembrance Day is to remember our own fallen victims of those wars, those people who had died in the war. But in fact, it's there to remember everybody who died in a war, those who fought with us or those who fought against us. It's just a remembrance of the human disgrace of that war. Our Remembrance Day is it's actually the name Remembrance Day is used throughout the Commonwealth countries, the countries that were or are or were part of the British Empire or the British Commonwealth of countries. So it's a British holiday set up to remember British and French soldiers and American soldiers, but America has a different name for their Remembrance Day. I think it's Veterans Day. And I'm driving around in Southern California, I don't see a poppy anywhere, because poppies are not necessarily followed. It's not the same tradition in the United States, right? So in Canada, this airhead, ignorant, bigoted old man is only a little bit older than me, so I'm not saying that in a negative way, but he's arrogant and bigoted, and we actually have Canadians that support that sort of attitude. And while they're supporting that attitude, they're stating that that do not buy a poppy. I'm a Canadian in California, I don't know where to buy one, even if I wanted one. But those people are stating that anybody who doesn't buy a poppy is not remembering what those people had fought for. So I want to tell people that those who are arguing against the immigrants, any immigrant, arguing against them keeping some of their traditions and maybe their language, and arguing against those people having the same freedoms as the rest of us enjoy, are not supporting the troops. They're actually joining the enemy of our troops. So those people who feel that people in either, well, especially in Canada, should be celebrating Remembrance Day in all the same ways, are not actually supporting the troops at all. They are in fact echoing the voice of the enemy those troops fought. It's just a thought. Do what you want with it.